Good morning, everybody, and welcome to a very special time together that we have this week. As we unfortunately can't meet together, but I'm so thankful that we have a chance in the technology to be able to record something like this and send it out so that we can still be in the same store, we can still have the same experience, and we can still connect on a certain level with this time of Advent as we prepare for Christmas, when we prepare for the birth of Jesus. And as a couple weeks ago, we started a little bit early. John was here last week, but for the first week of Advent, we started taking a peek a little bit at the Advent conspiracy as we move forward into this season. And I got to be honest, the starting of this week with the idea of spending less was a really interesting topic and a difficult one to really address and to take a look at and figure out what in the world are we going to do with this idea of spending less. And as I've thought about it, I think one of the biggest confusions is that the topic itself is just so strange. Spending less. What is this idea even all about? I mean, are we talking about spending less in the sense of we're just going to buy a whole bunch of cheap things and you're going to your friends and your family and you're saying, hey guys, I'm sorry, we're not doing much this year because my church told me that I can't spend a lot of money for Christmas presents, so I'm going to give you this little Rubik's Cube. Got it at the dollar store, so you can take this guy and I promise you it's going to do one of two things. It's either going to give you hours of entertainment or it's going to drive you absolutely crazy and you're going to need to spend a whole bunch on counseling bills just because you can't figure out how to get this little guy all to one color. But it does promise hours of entertainment or a lot of money in counseling at the end of it. Or does this idea of spending less, does it mean not spending money at all on your family and friends, but only just taking that same amount and giving it away? Several years ago when I was working in Christian bookstores, I met a family during the Advent season, during the Christmas season, where they came in and they're buying stuff, and I was talking to the kids and asking them about presents, and the kids got really kind of sad, like oh, and the parents were like, well, we decided that we're buying presents for other kids this year, so our family's not buying presents for one another. And part of me was like, well, that's really cool. And I would ask the kid, I was like, so what do you think of this idea? And he just looked at me, he's like, I don't really like it, but I can see why we would want to do that. But it's just, I'm not a big fan of it myself. He still wanted to get something. Several years ago also, there was a movie called Skipping Christmas, or Christmas with the Cranks, based off of the book Skipping Christmas, where the family decided that they weren't going to be engaging in community Christmas, but they're going to take all the money that they would have spent on Christmas gifts in the season, and they were going to go on a holiday instead. So is that what it's about? Is it about not spending money and just either giving it away or doing something completely different? And then there's also the question simply of who are we spending less than? Are we spending less than our neighbors? Are we trying to keep up with the Joneses in one sense, since we feel like we have to spend a certain amount to make sure we're matching what's going on in the rest of the world around us? Are we talking about spending less than parents who, like for my kids, am I spending less than my parents or Kara's parents on Christmas gifts? Or am I spending less than my family in itself as we look at how much we've spent on previous years? What does this mean to spend less? A few weeks ago, when we were looking at the idea of worshiping fully, we were talking about consumerism and American culture, and we talked about how the average American family spends about $1,000 during the holiday season, including Thanksgiving, but on meals and gifts and everything else. And the book itself, The Advent Conspiracy, says that on average, the American family spends $1,000 just on gifts. Well, if I'm going to compare myself with what they're saying the average is, I know them already spending less because my family does not spend $1,000 on the Christmas season. So what am I supposed to be spending less than? What are we supposed to be spending less than? Go and think about that for a minute. Who are you supposed to spend less than? And I think that really what it comes down to, it's a decision that only you can make because there's not a set amount of how much we can spend. That is, you and your budget are the ones that is going to determine how much you're going to spend and where you're going to spend less or more, or how that's going to work. So what I want to do is I just want to take a look at ideas and some thoughts that can help guide that decision on what that means and how we can spend less. And this idea of spending less is really more looking at the hows we spend, the hows of why we spend, and what we're spending on. And this is something that actually can work all year round, but it seems to have significant impact specifically during Christmas time. Now, I remember a couple weeks ago, we did take a look at that idea of worshiping fully, of what it means to really, really worship and to spend time worshiping Christ and not being consumed by the consumerist mentality that goes around us. It's about focusing on the reason we even celebrate Christmas. It's focusing on why we are here and focusing on Jesus' birth. And we're focusing on the chance that we have every single day in the way that we live to be proclaiming God's kingdom, and we can be living that out. And the rest of the Advent season, the next few weeks we're taking the idea of the Advent conspiracy, and we're taking that concept, that idea of what does it mean to worship. We're taking that, and that's the framework of worship as we go into the Advent season. The framework of what we're doing is worshiping. And now everything else is putting flesh on that idea. We are taking that idea of what it means to worship, and we're now looking at the practical ways that that happens and the way that that comes out. So we have our skeleton, and now we're putting flesh and muscle onto it. It's the practical side of things. And one of the stories we looked at was the story of the rich young ruler, as what it's become known as the rich young ruler, and about how this man who was very religious, he was doing all the right things. He comes to Jesus and he says, what else do I need to do to attain eternal life? What else do I need to do to really make sure that I'm in there? And I love how one of the Gospels says that Jesus looked at him and loved him, because he looked at him and he said, I love what you're doing. I love who you are, and I see the one small flaw that you have in your system of thinking. It's not about the laws. It's not about following and doing all the right things, but it's about where is your heart? Where is your treasure? Where is your passion? And for the rich young ruler, it was in his possessions. And so when Jesus tells us in the Sermon on the Mount that we can't serve two masters, we can't worship God and we can't worship mammon, and that idea of money or possessions or the things that we own, we can't do both. But where our heart is, that is where our treasure is also going to be. And I think it's pretty obvious to anyone that the things that we have can be an allure to us. We like things. We want certain things in our life. But one of the things that I have discovered, one of the principles that I have discovered over the years, and I'm assuming, or I'm hoping that many of you have as well, that things don't bring contentment. And it's kind of ironic that it's something that we hear all the time. We always hear about things will not bring you contentment, and we need to focus more on the intangible stuff. But what do? We still collect more and more things. But having things does not produce contentment. In fact, even Paul taught in his first letter to Timothy, he said that godliness with contentment is great gain. And this idea of contentment, that word contentment, when you do the study on it, it's this idea of sufficiency. Do you have enough? Are you happy with what you had? Are you striving for more? For Paul, he says that all he needs is food and clothing. He says, with food and clothing, I will be content. Well, with food and clothing, personally, I think that I would be full and hopefully be a little bit warm, but I honestly don't know if I would be content with just those two things. That's something that I've got to think about myself. What is it that I need to be content? Paul also told the Philippian church that he knew how to be content in all circumstances. He knew how to be content when he was full, when he was hungry, when he was in plenty, when he was in want, because he recognized in himself that the contentment that he was driving was not from the circumstances and the things that were around him, but because God had given him the greatest gift he could ever have, and that was the salvation. And so Paul focused on that, saying, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I can be content in any situation because of Christ who strengthens me. So Paul's needs were simple. He didn't want much. He had clothes. We know that he also, when he's talked to Timothy, he said, hey, bring my cloak, bring my books, because I want to do some work on some things. So he had some books, he had some clothes, but he was generally happy with what he had, and he did not really seek more. So how much is enough? If we look at what we have and we are always saying that we want more, if we say, I will be happy when I get this, or if I had this over here, then I would be happy, we need to analyze whether or not we have an issue with contentment. And when we get to that point and we start asking ourselves that question, that is the time when we need to seriously consider, do our things have control over us? And the thing is with Christmas and this time of year when we're out buying gifts is we run into this idea of feeding into that discontentment through the gifts that we get and through the gifts that we give. Now, I'll be honest with you. I am a notoriously bad gift giver, and it's absolutely true. I am absolutely terrible at giving gifts. And I could blame a lot of things as I look at it. But one of the things that I look back in time saying, how did I get to this point where I am just so terrible at giving gifts? As I look back to when I was young. And when I was growing up, for me, Christmas was all about the wants. What do I want every year? In fact, this is back in the days of catalogs. And so what would happen in around November time period, we get the Sears catalog. And my brother and I would each get a time with the catalog, and I would go flip back to the toy section with a pen, and I'd go through and I'd circle the things, write my initials by it, and again, give that to my parents. And they would go through and they would decide what they wanted to get for my brother and I for Christmas based off of that selection of things. The thing is I'm just going through this catalog, and all I'm really doing is looking at the things that I think look cool. The things that I look at and go, oh, that just looks so neat. That looks like so much fun to have. I've got to have that. And as I got older, that same idea, we got rid of the catalogs and we went to just a basic wish list. But the idea is still there. What kind of things do I think look cool? Not sort of, what do I need? What do I want? It was just all based off of desires, of greed, and just saying, let me have all this cool looking stuff. Now, the thought behind it, of course, is honestly just to give those ideas so you can see, you don't buy the gift that the person doesn't want, but you can look at the list and you can go, yeah, this is the one that I think that I want to give to that person. Because then I know that person is going to get something that they asked for, they're going to get something that they want, and there's less, they're more likely to have a surprised enjoyment of Christmas. You're guaranteed with those lists to get what you want. But what did the process teach me? 1, ask for as much stuff as you can, because you're going to definitely get something. And the more you ask for, the more you're likely to get it. It's kind of like taking a bunch of cooked pasta, just taking these things and just throwing it against the wall to see what sticks. And in that case, nothing stuck. But the idea is throw as much as you can out there to see what is going to come back to you. In one sense, I feel like it actually taught the greed of, I want this, I want that, and if I don't get a certain number of things off my wish list, I'm going to be disappointed. But it also taught me to not really think about the other person when I'm thinking about them and giving them gifts. Even people in my own family who I'm supposed to know deeply, know what makes them tick, all I did was grab the list, look down and go, yeah, that one looks good. But what brings them joy? Just because something is on a list does not necessarily it's going to be something that brings a person joy. It doesn't think about what's the likelihood of this item. Is it going to end up just sitting on a shelf in a couple of months? Just look at the list, pick something quick, easy, go on your way. And part of this idea of spending less is to put thought and care into the gifts and give something that is meaningful to that person. Spending less does not mean don't give. It means give thoughtfully. It means focus on that person. Who are they? What brings them joy? It's about quality over quantity. And even that idea of quality, though, however, is really quite subjective. The idea of what brings somebody joy is an idea that can help with that. And this is something that my family has been doing for the past several months. We've been going through and we've been taking a look at the clutter in the house. So we've been trying to bring things down a little bit because we just look and go, we've got so much stuff and a lot of it we're not using. What do we keep? What do we get rid of? What do we do with all these things? And we've been going with this concept of what brings us joy. What do we look at and say, I really enjoy that? I look at that, it makes me smile and it makes me feel good and it brings me contentment. Because clutter and things we don't use don't bring us joy. So when we give the gift, we're looking at it saying, what is that person going to enjoy years down the line? So personally, for us, what sort of things in our household bring us joy? I can only speak for me personally on a couple of these things, but one of the things that brings me joy is my kitchen mixer. I absolutely love my kitchen mixer. Just looking at it, I start seeing it. Even this picture that I've got on the screen right now, I'm like, oh, I'm going to go make some bread earlier. I've actually got some cinnamon raisin bread rising right now as we speak that I made on this very kitchen mixer with it. I mix everything with this thing. I absolutely love it, and it brings me so much joy to have that. Other things that bring me joy. My silicone bread pans. These things are amazing. They make the best bread, browned all the way around. It is it's artisan bread, just in a very, very simple thing. I love all of them, because I have more than just this one, all of my silicone bread pans. What else brings me joy? I love my power drill. My power drill is great. It gets me out of so much different stuff. Something else that brings me joy? My circular saw. These are things that I look at, and every time I bring them out, it's like I enjoy using them. They make me smile. They make me happy. They bring me contentment. I would sincerely miss them if I did not have. But there are other things that we've been getting rid of that don't necessarily bring me joy. Puzzles that I've completed. I enjoy doing puzzles, but once I'm done with it, there's no need for me to put it on the shelf to sit there for 3 years and me not do again. Books that I've read and I've completed and I know I'm not going to read again in the future. All it does is take up space. I don't enjoy it anymore. It does not bring me joy. We've had certain board games in our family that we've played and we're looking at and we're going, we just don't play this anymore. We don't enjoy it. So anything that doesn't bring us joy, either as individuals or as a family, we are passing on. We are getting rid of. And the result is that we have a home that is being less distracted by clutter and allowing us to focus more on joy. And so when we spend less, and we spend less specifically on the things that give someone joy, we're helping them focus on that contentment. We encourage them to live life more simply. And the value of that gift actually increases because it's something that they value. And it's something that they truly get a sense of contentment and satisfaction of. And like I said, it also decreases that idea of clutter that can happen in our lives when we just start buying spaghetti and throwing it against the wall. And it allows a person to live more simply, which fits perfectly with the Friends ideal of simplicity. That's one of the values that the Friends Church holds is of living simply. And Faith and Practice sums up nicely in their description of the value of simplicity when it says in Faith and Practice, remember that God set humanity as caretakers of a creation which he declared to be good. Guard against waste and resist extravagant consumption, which contributes to the inequities and impoverishment of life in our own and other societies. Now notice one thing here. It doesn't say don't have things, but it warns against needless spending and on things that will be, quite honestly, ignored quickly. And that brings us to one final point in this idea of spending less, and that's that idea of ethics, which the quote from Faith and Practice that I just read emphasizes in there as well. It talks about simplicity, but it also warns against the consumption which contributes to inequities and impoverishment of life in our own and other societies. It brings us to that question of the things that we buy, the things that we own. Where do they come from? Do we even know where they come from? Do we know the conditions of the workers who created those things? Where are they sourced? What are those conditions like? Would we be offended if we knew the working conditions of the areas that those were made? This is where kingdom work and kingdom justice comes into play in the idea of spending less. This is the Micah 6 passage, which we read and we've read several times. It's the practicality of acting justly, of loving mercy, and walking humbly. Do the purchases that we make, do the gifts that we give, do they support and do they defend the image of God in others? There's an organization out there called Fair Trade. And Fair Trade is a conglomerate of groups of organizations and people who take a look at working conditions around the world, and they support companies that do practice what they call fair trade, which means that they're giving their workers livable wages. They're giving their workers safe environments to be a part of. They promote humane working condition. And the thing is that sometimes those products do cost a little bit more. They cost a little bit more to have that because some of the cheaper products are honestly the workers would be in conditions that we would not consider humane. We would not send our own kids to work there. We wouldn't work there because they're not safe. So as Fair Trade is the group of people that are saying, we've checked this out. This is a good ethical company to buy from and to buy those things from. So sometimes it may cost a little bit more, but is this a time when spending a little bit more is worth it? Would you be more likely to buy a handcrafted gift if that you knew that it came from a woman who was fighting against the sex trade, who was avoiding prostitution by making these things to sell? Would you be more likely to support a company that provides job training for the homeless? There's one in Denver that Cara and I used to be loosely connected with as part of the organization that we were working with when we were working in Denver, called Street to Life. And Street to Life is a t-shirt business, and they've expanded from screen printing to embroidery. And what they do is they have a program where they're taking people who are living on the streets and trying to get out of that area of life, and they're providing them with a job and job training. And as of recently, 75% of the people that have come through their program now have full-time employment. Would you buy a t-shirt from an organization that worked for something like that and worked towards something along those lines? Would you give to microloans in other countries where people just need a little bit of capital, just need a little bit to start off their organizations? Indiana Yearly Meeting supports Tanzania, and they support Kenya in this exact same way, where they go and the pastors there, they need support to run their ministry. They need a way to make a life, and so they give them microloans to start a small business so that they can continue their ministry, self-supported and not dependent on other organizations. For some, giving to a cause that they believe in is one of the best gifts that you can give. One of the best things that you can do for somebody, if they have a charity that they support and you look at it and you go, I can support this. It may not be one that you particularly yourself are interested in or feel a drive to, but can you look at something and say, this person loves this charity, so I'm going to give a donation in that person's name to that charity there. And that will be their gift for this Christmas. Spending less does not even have to necessarily mean spending less overall, but it's being more thoughtful. It's being more focused. What encourages contentment? What is going to make that person alive? What's going to make that first person feel thought of? What's going to increase that time? Can we even give our time, our personal time, as a gift to our family? What are the things that we can do to increase the idea of contentment, to increase the idea of joy, to live more simply this holiday season? How can spending less result in more contentment? Let's pray, and we'll talk about this more on Thursday. So Lord, thank you for this time that we've had together just to take a look what it means to spend less. And Lord, I know there's no specific passage in the Bible that says spend less so that you can give more, but Lord, we also know at the same time that these principles, this idea of how do we live contently, how do we live simply, how do we focus on you and worship, these are all summed up in that idea of spending less. focusing more on you and worshiping you more fully. So Lord, as we go about this week and as we enter into this time where the Christmas season is getting even closer and the Christmas is getting closer, and more people are thinking about what gifts to give, help us to remember what it is you have done, to focus on that, and how can we proclaim that more through the lives we live and the way that we spend. Thank you for this time, Lord. We love you, and we look forward to seeing how you're going to work in our lives this year. Well, thanks, everybody, and we will see you on Thursday for small group. Thank you for coming out and joining us, and we will talk to you soon.